It is a pleasure to welcome you to the fourth session in the Rubix Knowledge Series. And today we're going to be talking about the role of AI in our artificial intelligence in managing business risk. We're very fortunate to have an expert with us today who is internal as well as external, and our own CTO, Dr. Vishnu Ramchandran. But first, let's talk about our expert, Samiran Ghosh. Is a senior advisor to Rubix. He has had a 25-year career in technology in roles across Microsoft, IBM, TCS, and at Dun& Bradstreet. He was a former senior advisor at McKinsey, chief digital advisor at Microsoft India, and APEC technology head for Dun& Bradstreet. In IBM, he spent 14 years spanning consulting, sales, global delivery, solutioning, research, and product development. He also took a sabbatical for a year to work with the National Institute of Smart Government, which is a government enterprise and initiative for several e-governance projects, including the Aadhaar project. He is on the MIT, that is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology review global panel, and he's a part of the Forbes Technology Council, which is an invitation-only community for world-class CIOs, CTOs, and technology executives. So we're very fortunate to have Samiran with us this morning. Samiran, thank you for agreeing to do this. And our own CTO and product officer, Chief Product Officer, Dr. Vishnu Ramchandran. Vishnu is a PhD from IIT Mumbai. He has worked for over 14 years in various product development, project management, and operations roles, especially in risk management and in data analytics. At Dun & Bradstreet, when he was a part of DNB, he played a key role in setting up Smera Ratings Limited, which is now Equity Ratings and Research Limited. He also worked with Experian, where he helped set up Experian's business information vertical in India, besides its commercial credit bureau, and driving other digital transformation initiatives. Vishnu loves technology, but is a voracious reader, trekker, and swimmer. So thank you both of you for joining us today on this call. Really appreciate your time. Samiran, I'm going to start, with you. We have a mixed audience today of people who are from banks, who are from technology companies, insurance companies, and corporates. Just for my benefit, could you give us the most commonly accepted definition for artificial intelligence, and also share how are artificial intelligence and machine learning related?
Thank you, Kaushal. And first of all, thank you for having me over on this session. I'm not sure whether you kind of gave that introduction more to kind of convince people that I was good, or to just put pressure on me to perform. But anyway, so this question is kind of asked a lot of times, and I think because what happens is that people tend to use it synonymously, but there is essentially a difference between the two, and I try to kind of state it as simply as possible. So artificial intelligence is essentially the superset, and machine learning is actually part of artificial intelligence. That's the simplest way to look at it. Artificial intelligence is we trying to use technology to emulate human thinking. So whether it be cognitive processes, whether it be speech, whether it be hearing, it could be smell, could be motion. And of course, there is a whole amount of intelligence and analysis also, which is part of it. Machine learning, on the other hand, is really about using the capabilities of machine and technology to analyze data and give you results based on either algorithms or models that you have created, or by the machine learning by itself and kind of giving you those results. So machine learning is kind of a small part of what artificial intelligence really is. Machine learning is really about the data, looking at the data, understanding it, and kind of giving you results. Artificial intelligence is really kind of a much bigger gambit, and it is really about, can we really create an artificial human who has intelligence? And just to kind of make it real, I'll kind of give you a few examples. So Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, they are all examples of artificial intelligence because you've got many things working together. You've got speech, you've got unstructured questioning, and you've got, search and, a whole bunch of things going together. On the other hand, if a simple example of machine learning is the auto tagging feature on Facebook that, you kind of have a friend and it auto recommendation. So it says, if you know so-and-so, that, so-and-so also could be could be your friend. The Amazon recommendation engine that, if you buy XYZ, the other thing could also be something that you would want to buy. So this kind of the simple and easy way to distinguish between artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Okay. So let me ask you a provocative question, Samiran. Is AI in its current form, is it real or is it hype? AI is really hot right now. There's a lot of commercial interest in it. And there is an expectation that it will have a revolutionary impact on business, on government, and on society. Yet, there are many skeptics. And do you think that that business will actually be able to commercially harness artificial intelligence in the next decade? And if yes, then in which areas?
Okay, that's kind of a fairly complex. So let me try and answer it as best I understand it. So artificial intelligence is definitely a real technology. It has been applied in a lot of places, but the jury is really out there in terms of whether it can still be applied at scale. And there have been several studies done by leading management consultancies, the McKinsey's and BCG's and MIT has done some studies to say that, like what will it take for AI to scale? And a couple of things that they have found is that so companies that have used AI very effectively have done well. That is not to say that companies that have not done them have failed, but when they kind of dug deeper into this whole, the companies that have done well and used AI, what they found was that these companies just did not use AI. These companies were already very digitally savvy, and by that I mean that they were already creating and generating data that the AI systems that they put in place could use. So they were already kind of fairly far along the path of automating their systems, processes, doing supply chain work, doing plant automation. So all of the data was also kind of providing fantastic input to their AI systems. And number two is that they invested very, very heavily on training of their personnel. So which is kind of not a known thing, but studies have shown that as much as 50% of AI budgets actually kind of go into training, at least for the successful companies, if you kind of dig deeper into them. And third, canon and allied feature is to kind of work very, very heavily on the cultural aspect of this. And by culture, I don't mean just this kind of acquainting people, but I'm sure we'll kind of touch upon this later. But the fact that, AI is meant to kind of coexist, it will not take your jobs, you need to kind of use these systems, they need to work together. So, all of these things play a role in the ultimate adoption of AI. So, just putting AI into a company has never worked, and the chances of it will fail are very great. And most companies kind of never get past a few proof of concepts, and they never kind of make it an enterprise solution.
Yeah. There's a fascinating word I heard, Samiran, that people are calling it like a product washing. Essentially just say that it's an AI-enabled tool, without really having much AI. So there's a lot of that happening, a hype in terms of your product. It's like, earlier, many years ago, it was, when you put technology in your name in the 90s, then you were regarded as this, the stock market gave your price a bump. All of that happened because you were riding the technology boom. So I think there's a little bit of that happening with AI as well. But like you're saying, there is reality, but it takes a lot of hard work to get that done. It takes training, it takes, digitization and putting it all together. And on the other hand, it's not just going to work if you take a solution and plonk it in and say, okay, I'm AI enabled. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely. It needs to be a well thought through program. It needs to be kind of seen through. You can't kind of go on halfway and then kind of come back. And to your point, that the fact that there is hype, and there is absolutely no denying the fact that there is, every startup or anybody who's going for Series A, B, C, D, E funding wants to call themselves AI enabled, because it makes them more attractive and makes them that much more uh, palatable to peers, and I think customers also like to buy something which is fashionable. So there is definitely that hype around it. But like I said, for the companies that have been truly successful, and if you kind of look at the list of the World Economic Forum's Lighthouse project, that is manufacturing companies that have been super successful. So there is usually a much larger program that is running across the company, where kind of AI also becomes a enabling lever. So it's not like the, that one drug that will kind of solve everything.
Right, right. Um, let's now turn to the role of AI in managing business risks, which is our topic today for the session. According to both of you, which are the areas of business risk that AI can help prevent, predict, or let's start with predict, prevent, mitigate, and manage? So when I was thinking about this, I said we wanted to predict it first, AI to predict the risk, second is to prevent the risk, third to mitigate the risk, and then finally to help us manage it. If you can share some examples of where AI has been useful in managing business risk, that would be great. So between both of you, Samiran and Vishnu, if you could address that, it would be great. And folks, thanks for getting the questions in. Some of you started sending them. Please feel free, just tap on the Q&A icon on your screen and keep sending the questions in. We'll try and make sure that we ask as many of them as possible to Samiran and Vishnu. So thanks. But yeah, over to you guys.
Vishnu, you want to take this question first, and I kind of will add on to it.
Sure. So, couple of things immediately come to my mind. At least starting with our own domain. One thing we have seen, is that when you are want to assess credit risk, typically of your customers or of your different counterparties, what we have seen is social media as an element is very important. Now, every company typically leaves footprints, digital footprints on the web, in the social media. Now, because the social media is such a vast area to mine and to keep a track of it, I think the AI fitment there is very good, because typically AI modules or AI algorithms can actually scout to find out certain key red flags, for example, in your customers or in your dealer distributors. It could also help you in finding out any specific customer feedback or customer complaints that are coming in. Actually, a lot of companies which are very proactive use AI in a very effective manner in order to gauge customer sentiment, and it enables them to be more proactive, responsive to customer needs. So that's another big area that I could think of. Another thing which I have personally witnessed is that AI is very important in defending against cyber attacks. So today we are living in a world where that you are getting bombed left, right, and center, whether on your emails or your different things. So it's coming from various points in the world. So typically it requires a machine to beat a machine. So also to detect some of these threats. So in a lot of these technology tools or email solutions that we are using, I don't want to be brand agnostic. I want to be brand agnostic. Is that they typically have a lot of strong AI layers which are able to detect these intrusions. Also to defend it, or to allow the user or pass on the control to the user to either block them or to respond appropriately. So these are 2-3 things which come to the top of my mind in terms of addressing some business risks.
Samiran, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so Kaushal, I think the thing to look at here is that there are different kinds of, there is the kind of the risk before it happens. There's the in-process risk, and then there is the risk that you would probably analyze post facto to say that, why did this happen, and take corrective action. So let's just kind of focus on the in process. So in process, there is there have already been systems which track audit and compliance, and also there is that element of risk that there are solutions and tools that people look at, just the plain risk of doing business. Are you not violating any norms? Are you within control limits or whatever you do? So there is that risk that needs to be managed, and there are tools for that. The other aspect of in-process risk is this whole thing around the credit card systems and payment systems in the world, where people like Visa and Mastercard have extremely sophisticated systems that keep track of where if a if a transaction is potentially fraudulent, what is the chances? Should it be flagged? Should it be stopped? Who should be alerted and stuff like that? And the same thing, as Vishnu mentioned, is also true for cyber attacks. We'll come to the post fact, but then there is the whole thing is that once the after the fact that there has been a problem, you've investigated, then you kind of go into this whole analysis of how did it happen, and then you could probably use some machine learning tools, you could use some artificial intelligence algorithms to just figure out how did it happen, why did it happen, and how can I kind of plug the gaps for against future mischief. And then kind of we come to this whole the area of prediction, that which is kind of probably the most difficult part, that how do you kind of foresee something is going to happen. I think most of it will have to be based on the historical information that you have. So, what are the chances that an insurance fraud will take place? What is the profile of the people who we should be giving less insurance to, more insurance to? So, and if you kind of go to the, actuaries in the US, so if you are a bachelor and driving a two-seater sports car, your insurance is much higher, because they have historically proven that these people are prone to more, accidents. But if you're married, driving a sedan, and family, then you have a difference in insurance. So that's kind of, in a way, the predictive part, that we know for a fact that a certain risk profile bears a lower risk versus a certain other risk profile, and therefore we can kind of tune our business, tune our pricing through sales offerings to kind of take the risk into account while we are kind of moving business forward.
Okay, so that's a perfect segue into my next question for Vishnu. And Vishnu, you've had tremendous experience in establishing AI-based platforms, right, at various credit bureaus that you worked with and helped set up. What has been your experience of working with AI? How useful and accurate is it when it is deployed in a real world environment? I ask because I've been doing some reading, and a lot of people state that real world deployment of AI tools actually degrades the performance of AI. So what is your experience? It'd be wonderful if you could share that.
Sure. In fact, credit bureaus are an excellent test bed for developing these solutions, like AI solutions, because AI typically requires a lot of data and a lot of good data. So you cannot develop AI systems. You can, by the way, you can, but it's always better to develop AI systems on top of good quality data. In bureaus, for example, you get data from almost the entire banking industry. So couple of things work very well in a bureau. One, the quantum of data is quite large. So, whatever models you develop are fairly robust. Second thing is, it's also a very good representative cross-section of different types of borrowers, different types of, products and things like that. So it's not, biased by, so for example, one particular bank is typically strong in a two-wheeler segment, two-wheeler loan segment, or a retail segment. So, only they get access to only that data. But typically in a bureau, you get access to data of, the entire cross section. So that's why even the bias reduces to a great extent. Having said that, I would also flip it in another way, that bureaus by construct, by law, cannot accept a lot of other data apart from the bank data. So, use the social media data, or for that matter, transaction data of the bank's internal systems. Those are not typically available to the bureau. So it's a mixed bag when it comes to a bureau, but bureau has a lot of, advantages when it provides these services to, for example, banks and other users. To your question about does the performance degrade? See, this is a a typical question of any modeling exercise. So when we do data modeling or any machine learning algorithm is that you always develop a model on a certain set of data, and then typically you test it out on a out of sample data. Always we find that, you know, a good model is the one which behaves more or less equal on both sides, that is in the development as well as when you test it. And to your question, yes, to a reasonable extent, the performance does get degraded. And that is the reason why, you know, AI is important, that, you know, you continuously feed it with real life data on a continuous basis. So if, for example, a bank or anybody deploys a particular solution, it's never a static solution. The data feed, the data pipeline to it has to continuously flow. So, you know, the system learns by itself, a lot of different patterns emerge. So it's never a static thing. So yes, when you try to deploy an existing solution, they say off the shelf into typically another environment, the performance degrades, but there are measures or means of improving the performance as well.
Samiran, you want to add to that?
So not particularly. I think Vishnu's actually covered most of it. I think let's carry on.
So that leads me to that is actually then a perfect segue to my next question. Again, what are some of the key essentials that a company or a bank should have in place? You know, some prerequisites before it can try deploying AI tools to manage its risk. It could be data, it could be people, it could be some, you know, digital transformation that is happening. So, I mean, what are some of your thoughts? I mean, the companies that have been successful at AI implementations, what have they really had in place?
So I think most of these people, like I kind of spoke about a little earlier, is that a lot of the aspects that go into making these programs successful are non-technology related. I mean, and I think you've already kind of answered the question. Kind of, it was part of the question. Is that the first thing and probably the most important thing is the data. I mean, the largest percentage of time in any project is spent in fixing, cleaning, finding just the right data to analyze. I mean, let's even forget AI. I mean, just to analyze data. You know, we've spent so much time just doing simple business intelligence and dashboarding projects because just the data is bad. So unless we can, you know, that part is fixed. One is the quality of the existing data, and then the quality and the data pipeline of all subsequent data that is going to come into the system. So that has to be put in place before you kind of start any program. There is the whole training, the talent, and the culture aspect which has to work. And then you need to kind of also identify either something which is easy to do to prove the value of the program, or something which is very impactful, which is like, you know, you kind of use a follow the money principle, that, you know, if there is a revenue earning idea which is out there, just so that you get enough buy-in to the project, or something which is kind of solving a really nagging problem which is causing a lot of strife across the company. You solve that problem and then you kind of move forward. So you need that whole engine of quick wins with a very clear eye to scale, you know, because I have seen, I mean, several projects just being great proof of concepts and very bad execution. And in fact, a classical example has been this a huge bunch of these algorithms that Google talked about will be fantastic in the diagnosis of COVID-19. And when they kind of put it out in the real world, it just didn't work. So, I mean, that's kind of a one-off incident, but the issue is that you must plan for that scale as you are beginning the exercise. Otherwise, you will just become a series of little showcases, and
exactly.
And everyone will lose interest, and, you know, it'll just become, okay, you know, it'll become be in the Hall of Fame of trophies of the company that we tried this and didn't work.
Right. No, we have a lot of technology folks on the call as well, and I think this is something that's important, right? For me, this is a very important thing, that you don't just look at it as a proof of concept, because somehow we are very good at proof of concepts, but when it comes to rolling it out at scale to solve a problem, I think we end up not planning for what is required to be done. We don't get enough support from the different parts of the company, and or the bank, and then it dies. And then, like you say, it just becomes a trophy project, which is very good to talk about in case studies, where you talk about technology, but it really hasn't helped monetize something, or monetize a product line or solve a problem. Vishnu, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just one more point I wanted to add basis, different projects that we do. See, typically AI projects or ML projects are done by a bunch of people who are fairly technical in nature. They are either statisticians or, programmers. So, whatever outputs you get, obviously those outputs need to be communicated to, say, decision makers or the people, all the end users. So I think one of the most important challenges I have, witnessed is the ability to simplify and communicate the results in a manner that, people understand. Because, either you make it into a black box, which, then the acceptance becomes difficult. If you try to get a little deeper, that, it sort of switches people off. So I think the fine art is about, how, the people who develop AI systems communicate the same, because, that always a bridge remaining. So even if the project is very impactful, it needs to be communicated in business terms to business people. And that's where, that always the gap remains, because otherwise it's always seen as a domain of the geeks. And that's something which is, and unlike the earlier age tech platforms, which are more workflow related, these AI has an ability to actually impact specifically business. So it talks business. It's starting to talk business. And that's where it becomes a little scary to people. So you need to explain it in a manner they understand.
So in fact, Kaushal, just as a aside, I mean, I was told in a specific training once that the most powerful analytics tool in the world is PowerPoint. That unless you can communicate what you are analyzed and what you have done, it's all meaningless.
Yeah, so I think one of the important part about about data science, and I've been again doing a lot of reading on this, is that on data science, which is an important feed into artificial intelligence. I think one of the most important things is that you need storytellers who are able to tell the AI story effectively, simply. For non-technology people like me, we want to understand what it will do simply. We don't want to understand the arcane stuff behind it. That's for geeks like you guys. But for the rest of us, we just want to see what's it going to do, how is it going to make a existing risk, predict an existing risk or mitigate it and do it cheaply. I mean, essentially that's what risk managers, for example, are looking for, or business folks are looking for. Okay, Accenture actually conducted its global risk management study in 2019 based on a survey of nearly 700 risk management executives in banking, insurance, and capital markets globally. And it's a global survey. Only 11% of the risk managers described themselves as fully capable of assessing the risks associated with adopting AI across their organization. So only 11% are saying that they are fully capable of assessing the risks associated with implementing AI. So even AI implementations carry some risk. What can risk managers do in order to upgrade their skill sets so as to work with AI tools in risk management?
So, Vishnu, you want me to take that?
Sure.
So I think...
No, I can take that.
Okay, go ahead.
I think there's some lag. Okay. No, Samir, you can go ahead. I'll add on.
So I think while with all due respect to Accenture, while that percentage is indicative, but at least for the risk managers on this call and who may subsequently hear it, is that no AI tool, there is no, if the risk is coming out of a fear, then there is no real basis for that, because no AI tool, no AI algorithm, no system can be built without risk managers. This system, whether it is for anti-money laundering, fraud protection? Is it for any other risk that you want to kind of capture or mitigate? These systems have to be built with risk managers. The only challenge is that the risk managers need to understand what that technology is capable of and then provide their input so that what they are unable to do humanly is possible to do with the system. And then that whole marriage of these two kind of keeps on, as the system does better, you can kind of push it to its boundary. It's like, think of it as a coach and an athlete, okay? As a world-class athlete and a coach. You can get more and more out of the athlete as the athlete reaches a certain level. So they can be pushed to do better. So the risk manager is really kind of going to be playing the role of a coach to that AI system, which will kind of keep doing work. So I think it is a reality that AI systems will need to at some point be incorporated just because of the scale of the business and the integration of global business. I don't think there is a need to fear. I think there's just a need to recognize that it's required and just learn to work with it without any fear. No jobs of risk managers can be lost because that human decision making will still remain. And we haven't reached any kind of Skynet situation now that the AI systems will take over banks and start running it. There's no such topic.
So that's a good relief because, I had a question on that. You already answered it, which is great because there's this whole hype that, risk managers are going to become, less relevant because the AI system is going to do their job. But you're saying that that's not the case. Vishnu, do you agree?
I complete to your second question about being redundant.
Yeah.
Not at all. Actually, I think I somehow, see the waves of AI coming. It started off in 1950s, then again went for some years. Again, it started in the 80s. Again, see that. So each time, of course, the development has been there. And each time they talk about a matrix-like situation that the whole world is going to be controlled by machines. But that's not the case. In the case of, here also, I think it will be a good digital assistant to human beings. I think it's more of a, the humans will be extremely important in terms of guiding the AI tool. So I'll just simply give an example to tie it to the previous question as well. That if suppose you have developed a model and if you deploy it in the real life, so example, you want to give a loan to somebody and suppose, the system outright rejects a lot of people. What do? You shut down the business or you only lend to 10% of what the AI recommends? The answer is no. Obviously, you have to, identify and give that feedback to the people who are either developing it or you do it yourself. So the idea is that feedback mechanism or the business calls, a lot of things has to be done by the risk manager. Second thing, we are even into the era of algorithmic trading, for example, high frequency stock trading, right? We have also seen that, any systems which are allowed to operate on their own also have disastrous results.
Correct.
We have not reached that level of maturity at all. Also, AI today cannot completely capture the styles of investing. So there are a lot of these intangibles, which today everything is, data driven. Okay. But a lot of this in terms of the style or the risk appetite or the risk, strategy, these all things have to be fed by an external human being. So that things will not go away. So while I do think that there may be some jobs which may become redundant, but I also see just like, your Microsoft Office, when it came in, Excel, PowerPoint, it created a whole host of different job opportunities as well.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. There's a
Kaushal, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, there's a very interesting question from the audience from Mr. Sunil Narvani. And there's two parts, but I'll focus on the second part. Vishnu, can you share any example of successful models based on AI or ML in the area of credit management for companies, corporates other than banks? So not banks, but where companies have done any kind of deployment of AI.
Sorry, Kaushal, your voice had cracked in the beginning. Maybe, I don't know, it's connected.
Can you share any example of successful models based on AI or ML in the area of credit management for companies, not banks, but companies?
Samiran, you want to take it first?
I think Vishnu, you may be best.
I will do it. No problem. I can.
Okay, I'll just add on to if there's something else I can do. Yeah.
Sure. So it's so in the in corporates, I think one of the things which is where they are lagging behind typically banks or other bureaus is that their data capturing mechanism is not as evolved as banks or this thing. So one of the things is the availability of data is typically lesser. So what I have seen, and I have also worked on some, is that typically you have ML models being developed on the specific data that they have. Because when you want to capture any particular aspect in, like for example, default on a trade credit, or for that matter delayed payments, or some sort of a fraud mechanism, these require a lot of data. So what I have seen typically is many a times companies build a mixture of heuristic, that means some expert judgment based rules as well as data driven rules to develop these models. I have not personally seen the advent of AI in a very big way here. People have tried to use, third-party models as it is. I think there is one more thing that, whether you can use a plug and play into the system or not, which people have tried. I don't think it has worked very well at all. So I think a good idea is always to work it with your own data. And for corporates, I have seen models being done, but it's always a mixture of heuristics and data-based, decisioning that I've seen.
So just to
Samiran, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just quickly. So while I can't tell you specific examples right of the thing, but just this whole in this COVID world, I have kind of worked with a few companies who wanted to kind of tweak their credit management and credit cycle and working capital rotation by overlaying COVID data on their distributor network. That
Correct.
is it even worth now going and collecting money from containment zones? Should we extend credit, or should we now give them some incentive to pay up earlier because we know it's going to be a problem? So while I won't call this the most sophisticated use of AI, but it is a use of available information to make very quick business decisions to, in a way, mitigate some amount of risk, because you know that this is going to be a problem in the future. So you're just kind of using the situation at hand to kind of quickly say that, you take PIN code data, you overlay that with your distributor network and say, I think XYZ all over the country, Maharashtra, Bombay is kind of, super red. So, is there any point in kind of doing anything here, or should we quickly run a little scheme so people pay quickly? So I've seen some of that happening in just the last 2-3 months. Like I said, it's not the most cool use of AI, but it was a very opportunistic use of data to make some very quick decisions to, improve your balance sheet position.
That's interesting. You talked about the current months and you talked about COVID. So there's a question from someone in the audience which says, any example, and either of you can answer it or both, any example of successful implementation of AI in pharmaceutical manufacturing, which has extreme importance in the current situation?
So a couple of things. So I mean, can't reveal the name, but I'm doing some work with some agrochemical company, one, and another one in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. So the one is the agrochemical company is using AI to just do rationalization and improvement of their supply chain, to say that, how can we kind of make this whole thing more efficient, get more efficiency, more productivity. How can we just manage, what can we learn from what we have done in the past, and how can we just improve this whole supply chain and then use that to improve their global network, because it is a global company. On the pharmaceutical machinery manufacturer, they are using, they have started embedding small AI modules within the machines that they are shipping to end customers, so that the preventive maintenance schedules can now be remotely managed, and which therefore allows them now to pass on some efficiency directly to the end customer, to say that, I used to charge you $100 for AMC, but now I'll charge you $80, but my upfront cost will be little more because I'm putting this little AI module in. which will allow me to kind of remotely log into your system and do XYZ. So, like I said, they're not like super fantastic examples of, world-changing events, but people are taking baby steps in this, and at least these are from my personal experience that I've just come across in just the last 6 months. Actually.
Vishnu, anything you want to add?
Just one or two. I've personally not witnessed it, but I have come across these with my colleagues and other people working on it. Now, one is counterfeiting. So for example, some of the pharma companies, along with the drug, they barcode it or chip it. The idea is they can track it wherever it goes, the entire life cycle. And since these drug, the packets, are numerous in nature, obviously, for somebody to keep a track of it and also to build analytics on it, it's difficult. So there, a lot of this AI modules are used. That's number one. Number two is, of course, people are using AI in a very big way in pharmaceuticals and new molecule discovery. So that's another thing, because today modeling or simulation of how typically a drug works in the human system is something which people are working on. I think even in COVID, I think a lot of this research is around that. For that matter, even testing actually, because, I believe one clear use case is also, where, they see the CT scan or even the X-rays of different people and try to find out the similar profiles to, whether it's a COVID or a pneumonia, or if there's any signature type of, patterns that they notice, they're able to identify these. These are 2-3 things that come.
No, yeah, in fact, I was reading about this, HRCT, which is the high resolution CT scan of the lungs. And, companies are saying that if you upload an HRCT, we're able to tell you with a degree of accuracy using AI, whether this would be COVID infected or not. Interesting. Not yet, fully proven. But I was just reading something about it, saying that, people are trying that. Okay. Samir, you want to add something? There are lots of questions. They're coming in fast and thick.
I was just going to say that in COVID, they're doing a lot of this vaccine discovery. The hypothesis testing is being done by AI systems to generate as many hypotheses as possible to discard them. So that, whenever there's a null hypothesis, so all of that, because you cannot humanly generate that many hypotheses. So just another pharma example, that's all. Yeah.
Okay. Great. There's a question from Harshada, who is on the call. She sent a couple, but this one is interesting. Talking about ethics in AI and, Alexa, Siri, etc. Are they all ethical? They're actually picking up sound bites in their vicinity. So, this usual argument, privacy and ethics versus the sort of convenience that some of these AI tools are able to generate. Samiran, your views on it?
Yeah, so actually there was a joke going around that, earlier they used to say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And now it seems it is that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas and on the Amazon cloud. Because because all Vegas hotels have started giving the Alexa in the hotel room as an additional perk. So anyway, but more importantly, I think this debate about ethics and AI is kind of much larger, and it's definitely an unsolved problem. And while this Alexa hearing and is a concern, but you can turn it off. But if you kind of read a little more, this whole thing around autonomous vehicles, and there's this whole trolley problem that in an autonomous vehicle, there's a passenger in the car and there are pedestrians on the road. So if there is something blocking you, what will the car do? Will it go and hit against a tree so that it saves the pedestrians, or will it go and hit the pedestrians and save the driver? How do these decisions get made? And so it's a very complicated area, and there are no answers. In fact, in the interest of the people in the audience, you can go and check out this thing called the I think it's the Moral Project or the Moral Principle. It's an MIT study which actually created different scenarios for this particular problem. They put people of different ethnicities in the car, different ethnicities on the road. Then they put pets, no pets, old people, young people, and they did this for 40 million people. And they said the results were completely varied, which means that supposing you were a pet lover, then you would avoid the pet and hit someone else. If you were from a society that reveres the older generation, then you would avoid them and hit someone else. Then if you are from a hierarchical society and there was a very official looking person on the road, you would
Wow.
avoid him and hit the other guy. So there is actually no right answer here right now, but it's work in progress. And I think the more important issue here is also very closely married to ethics is bias. And I think there was some questions, so I'll kind of quickly wing that in to say that even bias is because till recently it has been a very Western phenomenon. All training models are really very Western. So the only way this thing can be solved is to, it's like teaching your child something, right? I mean, if you kind of is brought up in a closed environment, they will only learn one thing. But the more you expose the child to the world outside, the more inputs they get and the more their worldview improves. So that's the same with an AI system, that the only way to get it rid of bias is to train it to see or train it with other data. I mean, there is, because otherwise you'll have that situation where, you know, if you're a black person from XYZ, then you're automatically a criminal and stuff like that, because that's the data that the system has. That if the data that you have is biased, then the result that you give will be biased. So I thought I'll just kind of take that up
Sure.
and stop there.
Sure. You know, there's a question from Mr. Rambabu Kethavatu. And this is, Vishnu, you will probably sort of know a little bit about this. How are AI bots impacting AML, anti-money laundering, in the banking system? Any thoughts that both of you have come across?
So AI is definitely being used for the bots in terms of customer service and customer response. In terms of how it is affecting anti-money laundering, I have not come across anything. I mean, it can be a vehicle for inducing somebody to part with the money. It's more of a fraud or type of tendency. But
So Kaushal, I can just tell you that one of the big issues of in this anti-money laundering surveillance is false positives. So
Right.
there's been a lot of work, a lot of time gets spent of companies to chasing down false leads. So I know of an example in HSBC where they kind of worked with a AI startup to reduce the number of false positives to improve efficiency of investigation by 20%, which means that all of these hits that you're getting, which could either be real people or it could be AI bots, and how do you make sure that it's a bot, it's not real, and just make sure that you remove, reduce the number of false positives. So that is one example that I clearly know about where AI kind of systems have been used to in the AML world.
Okay, that's good. Now, very interestingly, there's lots of questions coming in. So I'm going to try and take as many as possible. There's a question from Gnani, which says that in healthcare, if HCP trains AI models, a healthcare practitioner trains an AI model, what does she or he need to be aware of in terms of data protection policies and legal terms? So Samiran, as a patient, I definitely don't want my data being used in some kind of experiment, my personal medical data. What do you need to be careful of? I mean, what are AI practitioners doing to protect privacy?
So I think, quite honestly, this is actually a medical problem more than a technology problem. I think the person who's trying to do this needs to consult a lawyer first, because if you are deploying an AI system, it's going to collect data, it's going to keep that data, it's going to use it for whatever. But the more important issue, I think, here is consent of the person who is giving the information and informing them to what end use this is being put. So I think that is the bigger problem here than the technology leg of it, because we can obviously collect n amount of data of diabetes patients and blood pressure patients and do all kind of a distribution analysis and say in the Mahim Prabhadevi area there are more diabetics because Sweet Bengal is located there or whatever else you do. But I think the issue really here is the medico-legal one and not so much the technology one, that can you collect the data, and if you do collect the data, what all do you need to what consents do you need to give, and has the person cognitively understood that this is what is going to happen? I think that is the bigger issue. This is not an AI problem, really.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of questions coming in on supply chain, so I'm going to try and combine them. So there's Naveen who's asking, how can AI be used in logistics, in warehousing services? Similarly, there is Rupang Fauzdar who's asking, any example of AI ML used in end-to-end cold chain tracking of supply chain link, especially given the variation in climatic change. And one classic example of this is the fact that, a lot of the COVID tests, I'm just, bringing that in, failed in India because they were not stored properly because of the lack of a supply chain, cold chain rather. So the supply chain fell off because there was no cold chain properly and therefore the test gave all kinds of wrong results, which resulted in ICMR banning a bunch of companies. I've seen some, work around that. So supply chain, use in warehousing supply chain. There is also a question from Vipul Ambani that we are living in a world of extreme uncertainty and we need to ensure that our supply chains function. Can AI alert me to emerging supply chain risk? So, just combining all of this into a supply chain, cold chain sort of question. Samiran, what is some of your experience and some of your thoughts?
So again, I'll kind of try to give a short answer to this very long thing. So just because everyone's just talking about what's going on today. So way back in February, when this whole COVID thing was unfolding, I think researchers at MIT actually put out a study there without having this information which we have today, that just based on the data in February, that supply chains and logistics in the world will be severely impacted, and consumer goods, healthcare, and all of them are going to kind of suffer deeply if XYZ happens. So despite this being somewhat of a one-time event, they were able to predict and kind of hypothesize or extrapolate the fact that if these 5 or 6 things are seen to be happening around the world, then based on whatever model they had developed, they were able to extrapolate the fact that supply chains around the world can be impacted in an XYZ way. Coming to the point on cold chains and all, again, I think we should not confuse this whole thing about AI with a tracking or a sensor problem, because a lot of that now, a lot of the more fancier cold chain providers are giving you the ability to track temperature and all of that within the said container or truck or vehicle. And the role AI could probably play is that, if this keeps on happening all the time, then you can kind of figure out there's something wrong. But if it's just a logistical delivery problem, I'm thinking it more to be in the area of pure logistics and IoT, and, getting sure that the, sensors are in place and that information is coming back to you. But yes, supply chain has been looked at, and this whole current breakdown of supply chains around the world is kind of, some people have been able to predict it, and future supply chains, therefore they're kind of thinking of using blockchain to predict the provenance and veracity of medicines and supplies, kind of overlaid with artificial intelligence to make sure that they can predict and hopefully prevent it in future. So I know I'm probably trying to be evasive, but at a larger level, supply chains are being looked at, but I won't be able to kind of give you a pointed solution in your specific instance that has it happened exactly in a cold chain using AI.
Yeah, there's some good points coming in, also some comments. So Bala Menon has commented saying that fintech companies have been deploying, AI at scale and faster than traditional banks. Especially during lockdown when you can't physically verify customers, or whatever banks and fintech companies have to verify. They're being done. This verification is being done using new sources of data never previously used. Also, standardization is a problem in healthcare in India, and there are lots of because we don't have apparently a standardized drug code, and lots of interesting ways in which ML is being leveraged by pharma distribution companies at hospital level to standardize and predict demand. And yeah, so there's some great points coming in. Thanks, Bala, on that. I know we are running out of time, but the questions are coming in fast and thick. So I'm going to request you, gentlemen, to be a little more patient with us and give us a little more time. Any ideas, Samiran? Mr. Ravish Gambhir is asking, how can AI ML be used in cyber attacks? And also, how can it be used in blocking sort of fake demands, fake calls, or fake emails for fraud money transfer? You're getting a lot of this spamming, etc. Is there a way that filters can actually take some of this out? So cyber attack, Vishnu, if you want to take that, and either of you can sort of address this.
So, I mean, in the case of cyber, so Microsoft actually has got a center out of India, which is kind of their command center, and they have got many of them around the world. And all it essentially does is looks at Windows and Microsoft 365 logins to see that, who's logging into their systems and what is the possibility that it is actually a registered user, or is it a fraudulent thing? Is it a bot? Is it a machine? And then kind of alerts people to either locks that account or alerts the actual user to say that, I see that you logged in a second back from Delhi, but now you seem to be in New York. What happened? Stuff like that. So I think AI, along with very advanced automation tools, is being used in cyber attack management. But that is more at a enterprise managing these systems. I mean, I don't think there is anything at the consumer level that can do it at this scale. But companies like Google, Microsoft, obviously Facebook, and others who are prone to these attacks are already kind of doing a lot of work to manage it at their end. But that is not to say that it's foolproof. And people, the hackers are getting smarter every day, so that problem will continue to persist. And same is like, I think, true, and Vishnu can add more, that in this payment systems around the world, like I said, all the big payment gateways around the world have extremely sophisticated tools that manage, parse, and watch over all payments that go through, and they are constantly improving. Again, I will say that this is not a solved problem, because as the systems are becoming more sophisticated, as more payment systems and methods are getting integrated into the global financial systems, it is getting more and more difficult to monitor, and everybody is trying to kind of hack into it. But these are the places where very sophisticated systems are being used, and they are near real time. So and the kind of processing and all that they have to use is kind of mind-boggling, and that's the reason it can only be implemented at their end. I mean, I don't know of a consumer version of that available other than a simple antivirus.
Nice. Samiran, while you were speaking, again, our friend Bala, Bala Menon has written in saying, you have SMS and email spam filtering.
Correct.
Microsoft, where you were chief digital advisor, there are apps which are doing this at at an individual user level. As more and more people use it, it keeps getting better. So yeah, Bala, point taken. But I think, Samiran, what I heard you say is that there's still some way to go to deploy it at a consumer level, at an individual user level. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and I Kaushal, I frankly don't know if even the economics will ever allow these kind of complex systems to be used at the consumer level. But when the consumer interacts with a system at the enterprise, like it's like you logging into HDFC or ICICI Bank or using it, those systems have a lot of checks and balances in place so that things don't happen. At your individual level, I think it's more about individual diligence, and maybe some systems will come into place. But the enterprise problem is such a large one to solve right now. I don't think anyone's looking at individual solving of individual hacking, other than just basic hygiene things of be careful, don't leave your phone lying around, have a password, put some antivirus and things like that. So I don't think there's that much happening at the consumer level.
Okay, I know we're out of time, but I still have a couple of questions. So with your permission, I'll take them since the audience is still there and, is peppering me with questions. And this one is a question from Mr. Anand, that one important use case for AI in the banking and financial sector is fraud detection and compliance monitoring. Can you share some examples of how AI can be used in preventing bank frauds? Vishnu?
So when I used to be in the bureau, one of the use cases was typically identity fraud. So detecting, for example, if somebody has provided a particular type of KYC details, now does it match with that person, or has he submitted similar details to different banks and financial institutions? It helps you in identifying that. Secondly, people have already identified certain fraud profiles. So over time, basis a lot of data and already tagged existing fraud profiles. They are trying to find out fraud similars. So a machine typically can scan with respect to any different profile or any incoming profile, compares it with respect to its proximity to those established fraud profiles, and sees what's the proximity. And if it is it's similar, it at least flags it out to the user in terms of the degree of the match. So there are a lot of things where see, one thing is definitely there, that if the system identifies somebody as a fraud or a potential fraud, it gets passed on to the person or to the FCPU or the fraud control prevention unit to take a further due diligence there. So this is something I have seen with respect to the bureaus using fraud checks very effectively. Banks also use, we have seen with respect to any transactions which are abnormal in nature. For example, even if you were to do your own transaction, you would still get an alert saying that it doesn't fit the match the profile. So would you want to authenticate yourself once more or with some other identifier? So also the online transactions that happen, there's always a check done with respect to identifying any potential frauds. Or for example, you have done it from a different country. You used to do it, say in India, suddenly you're doing it abroad. You typically get an alert saying that, is this you that is genuinely the person? Else you can either block or you can contact the person. So those things are typically the use cases and the fraud detection area. I think Samiran would.
So I mean, at the expense of trying to sound a little geeky, so currently you have this thing called generative adversarial networks, those GANs. Okay, so where you actually are pitting two models against each other. So what happens is one becomes the challenger and one becomes like the defender, so to speak, and you kind of once they are pitted against each other, you kind of you see which one wins, and if the challenger wins, then you kind of train up the defender to protect it from the next time, and if the defender wins, then you kind of make the challenger do even more complicated. You'll find different ways of beating. So think of it like ethical hacking, but being done by machines now. So I mean, and that's the way banks and others are high frequency trading platforms are learning about how to prevent fraud detection, because it's like they don't know what they don't know, frankly. So they don't know where the next attack is going to come from. So they're just trying to figure out how to do this using, pitting artificial intelligence models against each other.
Okay, my last two questions. The first one is Vishnu, that very often you come across risk prediction models or companies that are selling risk prediction models that say that there is a they're 90% accurate or 95% accurate. It's all marketing, so that's fine. But very high levels of accuracy when promised during in AI-based risk protection models, they actually indicate that they're not likely to succeed in the real world, because if not carefully managed, an AI algorithm will go to extraordinary lengths in order to find patterns in data which is limited to which is sort of in line with the outcome that it is trying to sort of predict. But these patterns may be completely nonsensical and appear to work only during development. So how do you resolve such problems while building a risk prediction model?
So typically when you build a model, right, what you're referring to is actually a problem of overfitting. So, system understands the data so well, so it sort of even gives 100% accuracy, but, it fails miserably when it's tested in the real life. So one is obviously, you to have much larger data sets, both for testing and development and testing. Second, there are, when you actually build models, more from a technical side, you can, people generally remove a few nodes, a few variables intentionally. There are certain statistical techniques also, in order to, slightly deteriorate the performance of the system to make it more general, so that, it at least doesn't overlearn, the patterns. So there are different techniques that people use. One is the data. Second is there are certain variables being dropped intentionally. The third one is, there are certain bridge regression, other things that people use to moderate the model. And also, in AI, artificial intelligence, typically there is something called as epochs. That means how many cycles does the system keep on learning. So you can also truncate it at a particular level where, it doesn't overlearn. So, if it keeps on learning over time, it completely understands only that data. So, that is again is another filter where you can cut it off at certain point in time.
Okay, that's very useful. Samiran, there is an argument which is made that AI-based risk models cannot predict black swan events, because they are based on past data, etc. Would you agree with this argument? And if yes, why?
So so I think what I can tell you is that at least I can kind of flip that question around and say that enterprises that have some kind of AI system are in a better position to at least get some leading indicator of black swan events as opposed to systems that do not. I mean, that being said, I mean, obviously a black swan event is something which is unknown. And for all of those, I mean, who think that the pandemic is a black swan event, I'm actually I just pulled this out only for this particular reason. So there is a report called the Global Trends 2030, which is published by the National Intelligence Council in the US. Okay, and you can search them. This is not anything privileged. So it has got a column there which talks about predicted black swan events. Okay, there is a whole list. And the first one on that list is a global pandemic. And I'll just read out a few sentences just to kind of tell you what it says, and you can just correlate it with the world. No one can predict which pathogen will be the next to start spreading to humans, or when or where such a development will occur. An easily transmittable novel respiratory pathogen that kills or incapacitates more than 1% of its victims is among the most disruptive events possible. Such an outbreak could result in millions of people suffering and dying in every corner of the world in less than 6 months. This was written in 2012.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. So in fact, and just to kind of give you so Talib, who's the guy who kind of came up with Black Swan, so he says that the pandemic is not a Black Swan event because we knew this was going to happen. So a Black Swan event really is an event that nobody knows about. But even there are companies that are working to figure out, based on all the indicators that are currently available, what could be those possible things that you could kind of plan for, and there could still be others that don't happen. But like I said, if you have something that allows you to predict, you will be that much more prepared. And just in closing, I'll tell you that even in this New Yorker article, Talib actually says that the most common question asked of him in any speaking event is that, please name 3 black swan events that you could predict. So that's my real point, that while it is to an extent, I mean, obviously it's really unknown, but you can definitely reduce the amount of probability or the variability by at least having some tool or system that gives you a outlook of potential outcomes is my point.
Okay, my final question and for the day, and this is going to be a takeaway there are several young risk managers on the call, so there's a takeaway for them. Vishnu, Samiran, what skill sets would you recommend a young risk manager to acquire to stay ahead of the AI curve in the risk management domain? Any courses or any focus areas that you would suggest to them?
I mean, okay, so I'll anyway go for it. I think number one is that you need to be very good at your own job. I mean, while we keep on thinking about AI and systems, but like I mentioned earlier, your subject matter expertise is what differentiates you and gives you value. So don't get overexcited and start learning technology. Get very very good at risk, and then beyond that, how that can be applied or technology can be applied to it. There are several courses out there, and most of them are free. There's Great Learning, there's Coursera, there's Udemy, there's TEDx, whatever. Pick anything that works well for you. There is some Stanford course that is online, and there are specific courses. And if you do a search for risk analytics, you'll get a whole bunch of them. I think any of those will be good depending on what your end goal is. Do you want to build a system? Do you just want to learn about it so you can do your job better? Or you want to make a career switch? But if you're a risk manager and you want to build your career in risk and you want to marry technology, my advice will be to learn risk well, be a good risk manager, and then learn technology.
Right.
Vishnu, anything you want to add?
Yeah. So I, typically give an analogy of a car. So, you either can drive a car, you can, sit as a passenger, or you can get into, the under the hood and, tinker with all the bells and whistles inside. So even in the risk management domain, there will always be two classes of people. One, a risk manager who would want to just use some of the UI AI tools. So there the skill set is, as I mentioned, one, understanding what are the assumptions that go into the model and how do you interpret the output. Second is to communicate the same to your peers, to your hires. So these are the two skill sets I would recommend for somebody who is a passive user of AI. For the other class of people, who would like to, get under the hood, tinker with all of these. So for that, as Samiran pointed, there are a lot of courses. You need to have, it's a multidisciplinary thing. AI is, mixture of mathematics, statistics, coding, a lot of things. Frankly, I think one can self-learn, because I am a big believer in self-learning. There are tons of material available on the net, both written books as well as videos. I think it's more than sufficient for somebody to pick it up. Any other courses will always be an add-on for giving you a degree and a stamp. But I think from a knowledge perspective, I think a lot of things is already there on the web.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you to all our attendees for making this very, very interactive session. I think we've seen a record number of questions and a very high number of attendees today. So I'm glad that this topic is of interest. Samiran, thank you so much, and congratulations on your appointment to the Forbes Technology Council. I think we are running out of space now when we have to introduce you for all the places that you're coming in. Vishnu, your practical examples, very, very useful. Thanks for sharing them, especially in the, in the risk space. We really appreciate it. With that, I'm going to call this interaction to a close. I hope all of you have liked it. We'll put it up on LinkedIn for people to view it again or to share with their teams if they want. We've got our next one coming in, the fifth discussion in the Rubix Knowledge Series is on Thursday between 5 and 6 p.m. And this is going to be lessons in business leadership by two people who are at the top of the search business in the country, the executive search business in the country. Sonal Agrawal and Toral Patel, both managing partners of Accord Group, who do retained CXO level searches for CEOs, etc. So they're going to be sharing lessons on what we've learned in the new normal, as they call the COVID world. And then we have another one coming up on supply chain in the next week, but more details will follow. So once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Samiran and Vishnu. Have a good day, and most importantly, stay safe.